Do Russians want war? The brutal shelling of Kiev was, in essence, yet another response from Putin to all of Trump's peace initiatives. Not diplomatic, but to the point. The commander of the drone forces, Madyar, advised Orban to shove his sanctions up his ass in response to Ukrainian drone strikes on the Russian Druzhba oil pipeline. He's rushing to get things done before Trump arrives. Putin is already preparing to attend the parade with Xi Jinping and will be bringing along North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un. The Bulboführer seems to be backing down. At a meeting on potato farming, Lukashenko unexpectedly stated that he would like to govern in a non-dictatorial way, but so far he hasn't managed to do so. All this and more in detail right now. In the meantime, please subscribe to the Ukraine Today channel and give this episode a like. Russia's massive attacks on Ukraine threaten the peace that US President Donald Trump is striving for. US President's Special Representative for Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, wrote about this on social network X. Kellogg noted that Russia carried out the second largest air attack since the start of the full-scale war, using 600 drones and 31 missiles. The targets were not soldiers and weapons, but residential areas of Kyiv, sabotage of civilian trains, offices, EU and UK missions, as well as civilians. These outrageous attacks threaten the peace that the US president is striving for, the official emphasized. Dozens of people were killed, including 4 children. These are the results of the brutal shelling by the Russians. Everything was launched at the capital of Ukraine: drones, Kinzhal missiles, ballistic missiles, decoys. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian armed forces continue to strike military targets on Russian territory with pinpoint accuracy. Most recently, drones once again attacked the Novokuybishevsk oil refinery in the city of Samara. In addition, after a drone attack in the Krasnodar region, the Afipsky oil refinery caught fire. Explosions were also heard in temporarily occupied Crimea. Western media reports that Putin's army's summer offensive has failed spectacularly. But is that really the case? We'll also cover this in our military review.
Dozens killed, including 4 children. Putin's terror continues. Russia has carried out a massive attack on Ukraine. At night, enemy forces launched a significant and coordinated attack on the capital city of Kiev with numerous drones, powerful ballistic and destructive cruise missiles. The occupying forces launched a staggering number of nearly 600 unmanned aerial vehicles of various types, including reconnaissance and attack drones, and also fired 31 precision-guided missiles. Once again, residential buildings and civilian infrastructure came under a brutal and unprovoked terrorist attack, causing widespread damage and fear among the innocent population. The occupying army also carried out a precise and targeted strike on civilian passenger rolling stock, causing significant damage.
Terror against the civilian population is the latest element of military political pressure by the Russian leadership on both the United States and Ukraine, aimed at implementing its own vision of ending the war in Ukraine.
But Russia also had a very loud night. The Ukrainian defense forces are striking military targets on the territory of the Russian Federation, in particular the Afipsky oil refinery in Krasnodar Krai and the Kuybyshev oil refinery in Samara Oblast.
Damn, it absolutely blew up, completely and utterly. Ugh, that was truly unexpected, a real shocker.
It's currently burning quite intensely, emitting a significant amount of heat.
Explosions also thundered in temporarily occupied Crimea. Online sources reported a raid of about 200 UAVs. In particular, explosions were heard and observed in Sevastopol, Yevpatoria, the area of Belbek airfield, Saki, and other locations. And also, in the Sea of Azov, not far from temporarily occupied Crimea, the Ukrainian armed forces struck a Russian Bayanem-class small missile ship. As a result of the strikes, the Russian ship, which was in the potential launch zone for Kalibr missiles, sustained damage and was forced to leave its combat duty area. The enemy is also feeling the heat on the front line. Ukrainian kamikaze drones from the Korsar battalion delivered precise strikes on the occupiers' equipment in the Pokrovsky direction. As a result of the attack, a Russian tank and several motorcycles were destroyed. And in the Zaporizhzhia direction, the Ukrainian armed forces engaged in direct small arms combat with the occupiers and eliminated Russian assault troops. Snipers from the 144th Special Operations Forces Center put aside their rifles and, armed with grenades and machine guns, began to repel the assault and clear out the trenches. And overall, Russia's summer offensive in Ukraine has failed, as reported by the Western press. Most of the objectives that the Russians tried to achieve between April and August 2025 have remained unattainable.
The plans of the Russian political leadership for the summer campaign, not just the summer offensive as Gil's reports, have indeed completely failed. We are talking about the plans of the Russian political leadership to create so-called buffer zones with an advanced depth of up to 20 kilometers in the Sumy, Kharkiv, and Dnipropetrovsk regions. At this point, Ukraine's defense forces have completely neutralized these threats to the territorial integrity of our country.
Lacking any successes, Russian propagandists are spreading yet another fake about Ukraine allegedly preparing provocations involving hazardous substances in the combat zone in Donbas.
The primary goal of this extensive propaganda operation is to thoroughly discredit the armed forces of Ukraine and the entire Ukrainian political leadership by actively attempting to accuse them of egregiously violating their international obligations, which have been formally and unequivocally ratified by the Ukrainian parliament. This particularly concerns serious war crimes and the established rules and fundamental norms of warfare.
Well, absolutely nothing new or truly humane can be reasonably expected from Putin's utterly inhumane actions and his inhumans.
China has responded to Russia's massive strike on Kiev in its typically Chinese manner once again. Beijing warns against escalation and fanning the flames in order to promote de-escalation and create conditions for a political resolution of the crisis. That's how China refers to Russia's terrorist war against Ukraine. Meanwhile, the war criminal Putin is already preparing to attend the parade hosted by Xi Jinping, and he's bringing along North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un. This very parade will take place on September 3rd. But the most important thing is something else. Putin will meet with the Chinese leader before Trump does. Why is it so important for the bunker maniac to meet with his master Xi as soon as possible? We'll talk about this and more in our international review.
Putin is heading to a place where he definitely won't be arrested. The Kremlin dictator will travel to China for a full 4 days, where an entertainment program awaits him together with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un.
The significant meeting between Russian President Vladimir Putin, Chinese President Xi Jinping, and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is a compelling story of direct confrontation with the Western world and the broad coalition that Kyiv has diligently formed around the complex process of seeking a peaceful and lasting resolution or a complete freeze to the ongoing war. It's no secret that in the West, Russia is now often called a vassal of China, and the continuation of the war is generally seen as one of China's interests. That's why Putin is going to his master, his senior comrade, to seek support, especially against the backdrop of major economic problems.
It will all start with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit from August 31 to September 1st, where leaders of more than 20 countries have been invited. And of course, there will be a grand parade, which will take place on September 3rd. During the parade, China plans to demonstrate solidarity with Russia and North Korea.
At this crucial point, the very survival of the Russian regime directly and unequivocally depends on both significant economic support, robust military cooperation, and the crucial kind of political leverage that the People's Republic of China thoughtfully extends to the Russian Federation. And it's abundantly clear today that the entire world as a whole has undeniably entered a distinct kind of Cold War 2.0, in which the two primary and most influential superpowers, specifically China and the United States, are increasingly confronting each other on various significant battlefields across the globe.
But here's what's interesting. Putin will meet with Xi even before Trump does. Although the US president has stated that he is considering a trip to China itself, which may take place this year or at the beginning of 2026. The purpose of the visit is likely to continue negotiations on a trade agreement.
At this point, it is not advantageous for Xi to meet with Trump. And such a truly demonstrative refusal to hold this particular kind of important meeting is yet another significant blow to the very foundation of the United States as the primary geopolitical player and to America's established status as the world's global policeman. Therefore, I absolutely wouldn't jump ahead regarding a potential personal meeting between President Xi Jinping and President Donald Trump just yet, because it seems quite probable that China will actively seek to sabotage such a significant initiative from the American president and strategically use it to further increase its own geopolitical gains and influence on the global stage.
Meanwhile, there is clearly a labor shortage in Russia. Ukraine's Foreign Intelligence Service reports that the Kremlin is recruiting women from poor countries to work at its Shahed assembly plants. And they are doing this through deceitful means.
In South Africa, brick structures were used for recruitment. The Ministry of Women has called on young people to remain vigilant. Authorities have launched an investigation into the activities of Russian companies.
Orban is rebelling. Hungary is trying to challenge in court the European Union's decision to use income from frozen Russian assets to finance aid to Ukraine. Back in March 2025, The decision was made bypassing Budapest's opinion.
From a legal standpoint, Hungary can indeed use the argument that the decision was made without their participation, considering the legal norms of the European Union. But there is also a political aspect which in this matter is even more important. At present, there are indeed quite active discussions taking place in the heart of Europe regarding the reformatting or reforming of the decision-making process. At this point, it is obvious to everyone that Hungary and Slovakia are directly playing into Russia's hands.
On the night of August 28th, Russia launched another attack on Kiev using drones and missiles. There are reports of casualties and fatalities.
We are awaiting China's response to what is happening. China has repeatedly called for no escalation of the war and for a ceasefire. This is not happening because of Russia. We are awaiting a response from Hungary. The death of children should evoke far stronger emotions than anything else. We expect a response from everyone in the world who has called for peace but now remains silent more often than taking a principled stand.
But the one who truly understands Russia's intentions is the German Chancellor, Friedrich Merz. He stated that Germany does not want Ukraine to surrender, as this would only give Russia time to prepare for the next act of aggression.
President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky emphasized that only outrage can be caused by the decision to ban entry to Hungary for one of the Ukrainian commanders with the call sign Madyar. The head of state reported this on social media. Now, as our people are dealing with the aftermath of one of the largest Russian terrorist attacks, we are witnessing yet another attempt by Hungarian officials to paint black as white and shift the blame for the ongoing war onto Ukraine, Zelensky noted. As for the commander of the drone forces, ethnic Hungarian Robert Brovdi, known as Madyar, he was more straightforward in his reaction to the entry ban imposed by Viktor Orban's government after the strikes on the Druzhba oil pipeline. He advised, and I quote, "Shove that decision up your ass." Brovdi added that by purchasing Russian oil, the Hungarian government becomes complicit in Russian attacks on Ukraine, which result in civilian casualties.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
The United States is ready to supply European peacekeepers in Ukraine with strategic assets. And this is a significant shift in the position of US President Donald Trump, the Financial Times emphasizes. We will explain in more detail what this is actually about.
The United States of America will make its strategic contribution to security guarantees for Ukraine. This was reported to the Financial Times by high-ranking European officials.
Financial Times. The US has promised Europe support for peacekeepers in Ukraine with air cover and intelligence.
It is reported that Washington is ready to support the presence of European allies in Ukraine with intelligence information and by protecting Ukrainian airspace.
Europe is planning to provide Ukraine with significant security guarantees, and they have to do this because they are right there. We will be involved as a backup resource. We are going to help them.
It is very important that the United States has realized that without guarantees, Ukraine will not agree to implement not just some of Putin's wishes, but won't even sit down at the negotiating table to discuss them. Because, excuse me, to give up the Donetsk region, even the cities that aren't occupied, what for?
The willingness of the US to contribute is a very important signal for Europe. Over the past few months, leaders of European countries have declared their readiness to participate in a peacekeeping mission on the ground and in the air, with the caveat that it must have mandatory support from Washington.
Europe must play its part, and I am ready to consider the possibility of deploying British forces on the ground alongside others. But there must be US support because the security guarantee from the US is the only way to effectively deter Russia from attacking Ukraine again.
At this point, the discussion is about the White House providing assistance with logistics, command and control of troops, intelligence and surveillance, all the areas in which the potential European contingent is most dependent on the US.
In fact, what this means is that the United States has given the green light to European countries for a possible peacekeeping operation scenario on Ukrainian territory. And let me remind you, more than 10 countries have declared their readiness to provide troops from their own armies to carry out a peacekeeping operation in Ukraine.
It is also reported that there will be support with military equipment, particularly air defense systems, which will provide cover for European forces in Ukraine.
The military component will be accompanied by the United States of America. In other words, the US will take on the task of equipping the mission. Of course, at the expense of the Europeans, but that's already significant because the equipment has to come from somewhere. Where can you get it from if Europe doesn't have enough of its own military production? In order to do this as quickly as possible and implement those very security guarantees, the United States is essentially the only viable country.
Moreover, after the end of hostilities, Washington will provide its own aircraft and ground-based radars, which will help ensure an air shield over Ukraine.
This already significantly involves the extensive use of the crucial aviation component, which will effectively nullify the operational ability of the Russian occupation army to fully utilize the aerospace forces of the occupying country when launching devastating missile and bomb strikes, both on their critical logistics infrastructure and accordingly on peaceful Ukrainian cities and civilian populations.
The issue of reliable security guarantees is crucial for Ukraine. Without American support, there can be no talk of any reliability at all. In addition to the European peacekeeping contingent, the Russian aggressor will have to reckon with American military equipment, aviation, and intelligence information.
In St. Petersburg, cameras capable of recognizing the ethnic background of passers-by have been put into operation, reported Igor Nikonov, deputy chairman of the Committee on Informatization and Communications. According to him, about half or 50,000 of such devices in the city are equipped with this function, reports Rotunda. Nikonov stated that the cameras are used to monitor gatherings of migrants and to identify illegal apartments. All the details are coming up in the report.
A new video surveillance system has been launched in St. Petersburg. The cameras are now capable not only of capturing faces and tracking people's movements, but also of recognizing their nationality. However, Russia is increasingly becoming a risk zone for those who are outsiders and vulnerable.
Let me brag once more. This is also our trend, so to speak. We started it. We catch them during raids, register them, and send them there.
According to official data, about half of the 50,000 cameras in the city are equipped with an ethnic identification function. Igor Nikonov, deputy chairman of the City Committee on Informatization, reported that the system distinguishes up to 6 categories of races and nationalities. The authorities explained the installation of such equipment as a measure to combat illegal migration. The cameras are intended to identify areas with large numbers of foreign residents and so-called rubber apartments. The information is transmitted to the police and migration services. Cameras, raids, detention centers, the system is being set up to control and pressure, not to integrate.
We put forward a significant initiative to completely prohibit the use of certain harmful substances.
Unskilled migrants from bringing their large families, so that there would be no source of social tension, no long lines at clinics, no difficult behavior from migrant children in schools, and many other things that don't quite fit with our traditions and the foundations of our society.
The use of surveillance technologies on migrants in Russia has become part of a broader trend. Since 2024, foreigners staying for more than 3 months are required to provide fingerprints and biometric data. In Moscow and the Moscow region, a mobile app is already being tested to track their movements.
To significantly tighten the requirements for those individuals who are currently on our territory. These requirements stipulate that they must absolutely respect the people in the communities where they appear and live their daily lives.
At the same time, large-scale raids continue in St. Petersburg and other regions, with migrants being checked right on the streets and in dormitories. In the spring of last year, the Special Operation Anti-Migrant led to mass deportations. Detention centers became overcrowded.
Don't handsome guys handsome.
Oman officers are forcefully pushing migrants from Central Asia into a bus. One young man is knocked down, pinned to the ground, and his hands are twisted behind his back.
Russia's tough migration policy has repeatedly caused diplomatic scandals. For example, in Yekaterinburg in 2025, 2 Azerbaijani citizens died during a police operation, and several others were detained. Baku issued an official protest and demanded an investigation.
Azerbaijan accused Russian law enforcement of killing 2 of its citizens during the raid in Yekaterinburg and demanded an investigation. Azerbaijani journalist Seyfadin Guseynov, the brother of the deceased, told the agency that both of his relatives, and I quote, were killed with the use of torture. He also clarified that Russia is delaying the release of the bodies under a fabricated pretext. They are trying to present what happened as a criminal dispute. False information is being spread that they died of a heart attack? That was a quote.
The new cameras in St. Petersburg are yet another step toward total control over migrants. But human rights activists are already calling such measures discriminatory and warn that these technologies could be used not only against illegal immigrants, but also against anyone who, for whatever reason, is deemed undesirable.
The president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, admitted that he would like to move away from an authoritarian style of governing the country. However, according to him, he has not been able to realize this desire so far. Lukashenko's statement is quoted by the president's press pool, without specifying the context of this remark. At the same time, the channel notes that the statement was made at a meeting on the development of potato farming. Lukashenko, who will turn 71 on August 30th, has been in power since 1994. In 2020, after the presidential elections in Belarus, mass protests took place demanding his resignation. According to human rights activists, 35,000 people were detained at that time. After that, Lukashenko grew even closer to Russia, and Russian military contingents became a noticeable presence within Belarus's military structures. However, just recently, US President Donald Trump announced that he had a very successful phone conversation with the Belarusian dictator. According to the American leader, they discussed the release of another 1,300 prisoners in Belarus. One of the most influential and formidable people in Putin's inner circle is planning to resign. We are talking about the head of the investigative committee of the Russian Federation, Alexander Bastrykin. We will tell you about this punishing hand of the dictator and whether Putin will let him leave his post. In the meantime, please like this episode and don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel Ukraine Today.
A birthday present, or do they never abandon their own? Vladimir Putin has once again extended the term of the head of the investigative committee of Russia. On August 27th, Alexander Bastrykin turned 72. And on that day, he was supposed to step down as head of the investigative committee, with rumors suggesting he would move to the position of chairman of the Supreme Court. But thanks to a decision by his former classmate from Leningrad State University, Bastrykin has entered his 19th year at the investigative committee. In fact, this agency was created by Putin in 2007 as an alternative to the prosecutor's office. The new structure took over the unification of all investigators, personnel policy, and the investigation of criminal cases. The prosecutor's office was left only with oversight functions. Alexander Bastrykin became the first and so far the only head of the investigative committee.
High-quality investigations ensure proper protection of citizens' rights and freedoms, and our citizens expect this kind of work from the investigative committee.
Matvey Petrovich, thank you for the trust you have placed in me personally and in the team of the investigative committee. The important tasks that you are setting forth for our investigative body today, we will certainly fulfill with the utmost honor and dedication.
In reality, however, Bastrykin's investigative committee has not solved a single high-profile crime committed in Russia over the past 20 years. The cases of the murders of Politkovskaya, Nemtsov, Navalny, and these are names known not only in Russia but also abroad, have all remained unsolved.
For example, the investigative committee took control of the case of lawyer Sergei Magnitsky, who uncovered a criminal scheme and exposed how taxes were siphoned out of Russia. For this, he was killed in the Matroskaya Tishina detention center. The result?
Investigators found no criminal wrongdoing in the death of Sergei Magnitsky in the Moscow detention facility. Today, the investigative committee announced the closure of the criminal case regarding the death of the auditor of the Hermitage Capital Investment Fund, citing the absence of a crime.
In Moscow, the well-known journalist Anna Politkovskaya was murdered.
Result of investigative committee's work. Mastermind never found, case closed. The statute of limitations has expired.
The masterminds behind the crime have still not been found or named. The investigation stopped trying to find out who did it and has simply been inactive for several years. Today marks the expiration of the statute of limitations for criminal prosecution under such articles.
According to the prosecutor's office, the murder was not connected to Nemtsov's political activities. The alleged mastermind and organizer have still not been found.
And now it has been almost a year since Alexei Navalny was killed in the polar colony in Kyiv.
On February 16, 2024, Vladimir Putin killed Alexei Navalny.
The investigative committee isn't even trying to pretend to do any work anymore. They simply and unequivocally refuse to officially open a murder case investigation.
On the contrary, the head of the investigative committee is closely monitoring other investigations.
Bastrykin ordered a criminal case to be opened. Or even better, Bastrykin took the case under his personal control.
I personally go to every plane crash.
In his 18 years in office, Putin's associate Alexander Bastrykin has become known to journalists for high-profile scandals. One of them is connected to threats against the editor-in-chief of Novaya Gazeta, Sergei Sokolov. After a damning publication, Bastrykin allegedly took the journalist out to the woods for a talk and threatened to cut off his head and legs. After the scandal, he simply apologized.
I would like to sincerely start by offering my most profound apologies here to Dmitry Andreevich and his esteemed newspaper.
Here's another scandal that sounds like a joke. Russians didn't appreciate the ingenuity of the head of the investigative committee. He was looking for evidence in a photo on a laptop, examining it with a magnifying glass.
What is this, comrades?
Huh? A magnifying glass. And what's that, the youth meme? I took a magnifying glass and started doing what? There are forensic experts, right? Applying an optical image to a digital one, the mechanics of a digital image. I enlarged it using the optical mechanics of a magnifying glass.
undeclared property, a Czech passport, business abroad, children placed in privileged spots. All this went unpunished for years for the country's chief investigator. All because Vladimir Putin, unlike the Russian military, really doesn't abandon his own. He has been providing all kinds of support to his people since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion. Thousands of people who disagree with the dictator's policies have ended up behind the walls of Russian prisons. Bastrikin, for his part, even suggested bringing back the death penalty in Russia as a sign of his respect. In recent days, he was rumored to be in line for the position of Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, replacing his classmate Irina Podnosova, who died of illness. But it is said the elderly Bastrikin suffers not only from alcohol addiction, but also from illness. That is why the Kremlin decided not to continue the race on gun carriages within their own circle. That's what they used to call the series of deaths among elderly Politburo members in the USSR.